Hi, I'm Virginia Walton. I'm known for the Creative Curves rulers, which do the curved quilts behind me, but I have a brand new ruler that lets you not only cut different angles, like a protractor, but also cut off the points once you've cut those angles so that you have a wedge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance built in so that you can sew different angles together. And I'm going to show you how to make this little block that's right here in front. This is one that comes with the package that includes not only the ruler, but a book that has a sampler in it. And this is a variation of the center block and the sampler. So this is the ruler. It comes packaged with instruction booklet for a sampler pattern, and I'm going to be showing you how to make this block, actually a variation of it. And you'll notice that it shows you what angles to cut, what direction to cut from, and the straight line on here, that says there's going to be some extra fabric you throw away just in case you make a little bit of a slip when you're using a rotary cutter to cut that first triangle. Because each one of the rectangles that you're going to be cutting are going to give you 2 identical triangles of whatever the angle is you're cutting. You also have instructions that include not only how to use the ruler, but also the sewing sequence and how important it is that you match corners when you sew pieces because you're cutting angles. And this is not paper piece, it's directly cutting angles. And best of all, from my point of view, all the math is done. So how does it work? Well, if you can take a look at the ruler itself, here are the angles. I've got from 5 degrees to 60 degrees. And on the other side, I have from 9, 18, 36 to 45. And you'll notice the black stops here. It doesn't go to the corner. Now, the only reason is because if all that black went to the corner, it'd get pretty messy. You couldn't tell one line from another. But you always measure from one corner or the other, depending on your angle. Now, the most important part of this ruler, really the magic, is all these slots. There's one for each of the angles on here, and what that does, it shows you exactly where to cut off that extended point to give you the wedge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance built in. So now you can sew different angles together, not just the same one. So I'm going to show you right here. Now what this is a 20-degree angle. I'm making a 6-inch square. So it told me with my 6-inch square and the 20-degree angle to cut a 10-inch by 4-inch rectangle. Once I've cut my rectangle, then I can take my 20-degree angle, which is right here, this line, the protractor line it up right on the corner, and then I take that 20-degree line and line it up on the cut edge, and that gives me my first triangle cut of 20 degrees. The second one is buried in here. The reason I mention that is, again, I padded the numbers a little bit because I've been known to slip with a rotary cutter. So I can simply take this and turn it over, line it right back up. Here's my 20-degree angle, and there's about a 1/4 inch to throw away. So that extra fabric is somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch, something easy to see on a quilt. But once I've cut those triangles, and you can see here I've got my 2 triangles cut in my extra fabric. The most important part happens now, and that's taking that 20-degree, what I call a slot, because I couldn't think of another name. I'm going to line it up near the point, and I'm going to take the pin out of here so you can see when these 2 black lines match both sides of the triangle, it's exactly the right place to cut off that point. And now I hope you can see there's a little bit of space here between the 2. And that's how much was cut off. So once I've cut off the points for all the different sizes of angles, I can sew the different size angles together. So I have cut off 25-degree angles and 20-degree angles, and you can see I have basically my wedges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance built in. What you do next is you simply sew them together, and you do that a little differently. We're all used to lining up straight lines, and these look like pretty straight lines. But remember, this is an angle. So with these, you match corners. And when you match corners to sew pieces together, and here it is already sewn, you can see here I've got the 2 sides matched, ready to sew. And then I'm going to match these 2 corners to sew it again, and that's going to give me something that looks an awful lot like a flying wedge, one of those stealth airplanes. At this point, I do press. I have straight of grain on the outside on both sides. My biases are all next to a straight of grain, so inherently I have a real stable block. And then all I need to have is another ruler. Frankly, any size ruler will work. I happen to have a 2.5 inch or a 6.5 inch square here, and I can line that right up on the corner, make sure I've got it right down the middle here, and you can see what I would cut away here. And to give you an example of that, as well as the finished block again, here it is. Now, if you take a look at this, the first one I make, I use the numbers that are on that sheet. Because depending on where that angle is, I need all of the fabric if it's right down the middle. But if it's toward the outside of a square, I'm going to have some fabric left over. So common sense gets involved. And I'm a little frugal also, or maybe cheap with my fabric. I hate to waste it. So the next time I made this, because I'm probably going to be making more than one block, I could reduce that an inch, and I'll write that down in pencil. So I don't want to deal with the real numbers. They're very important. But on the other hand, I am going to save fabric wherever I can. And this is a variation of the block that is in the center of this quilt. This is one that comes with the ruler, here again, the package. I also made a smaller version using the 3-inch size square. So you can see a small variation for making a quilt. So not only can you do the sampler, but you can also make quilts of each of those blocks. You can also make rectangles and do traditional patterns. So let me show you a couple of other traditional patterns. So here I've got flying geese, and I've got a square to square, and here is something I called an uneven star. That's a real original name, isn't it? In any case, all of these different angles can easily be sewn together with no problem at all. The other thing you can do is make some traditional patterns. Those of you who like to do patterns like this, maybe some of those old favorites are wonderful to work with. So here it is, the individual pieces that it takes to make it. In this case, I used an 18-degree angle, and I did that by first cutting my pieces, taking a 9-degree sawed off so that I would have an even bottom. And I threw that away, and then I was able to cut up and down and get each one of these from my 18-degree angle. And then I'm back to my traditional pattern again. So there's a tremendous number of things you can do with this cool ruler. Really fun to play with. So here are a couple of other examples of what you can do with the ruler. Because it all started out with my latest curve book. I wanted to do something like this in the book, where I had some really interesting drunkard's path patterns with angles in that quarter circle. And then once I got started, it kind of grew like Topsy, and pretty soon I had a lot of other variations of things I could do. So here's one other quilt to give you an idea. I call this a square and a square, and needless to say, it's just the beginning of so much more. This quilt is a variation of that star-to-star quilt, and here I've used a 5-degree angle to give a real highlight to the design. And if you take a look over on this wall, this entire wall, I used the ruler to make the quilts. So I've got that uneven star right here. I've got one of the wedge quilts that you can either sew right to the center or do the applique. I've got a quilt with rectangles in it, because you can either make squares or rectangles. A Dresden plate, similar to the idea of doing the grandmother's fan. And then finally, the actual book that comes with the ruler, and that's the sampler. And not only the sampler can be made, but each of those blocks can be turned into quilts. So all of that is done with this new multi-angle wedge ruler, and I got to tell you, it's an awful lot of fun to play with, and quite a lot of variations of what you can do. So thank you very much. I've had a wonderful time having a chance to chat with you, and do please contact me at creativecurves.com, and if any questions, be happy to answer them.